Sound.
It's saying recording in progress, so I take it that we are there.
We are in. We are in.
Okay.
Okay. So I don't even know how to phrase things or anything because this is just completely new.
Uh,
Um. So yeah, for people that I'll do an intro before all this and
Go
things,
for it.
but people that don't know yourself that maybe didn't listen to the other podcast, which I will have a link for in the description. Who are you?
I'm Scott Parker, and I was once upon a time, a long time ago, graphic designer. But mainly, the largest chunk of my work would be for Ministry of Sound, but I have done a bunch of other stuff before and after that.
Mm.
So I would say I was mostly active as a designer throughout all of the 90s and the early noughties. More recent years, life and work have taken me in different directions. So yeah, that's the brief version.
No, that's fine.
Hmm.
Yeah, I had two questions I wanted to ask. The other one
Yeah.
was for you personally, what do you think makes good design before we
Oof,
get into everything?
good design. I think that clarity of the um, end product. I do like to be able to know what it is I'm
Yeah.
looking at. Um, that's a really difficult one. It's almost like saying what pick your favorite record or movie, uh, because there's so many different types of design. I mean, I look at graphic design from a fairly distant perspective these days, having
Mm.
not actively really been much of a designer in recent years. So
Yeah.
I have learned in older age to appreciate that good design doesn't always necessarily mean the coolest
Mm.
design or the sort of the most groundbreaking or award-winning design. It most of the time just means things that you see in everyday life that you just think that's really good. One of the things for me that actually thinking about it, I've used in recent times, I thought that's really well done, is the HMRC, the government website, the web portal on for the HMRC and the government and all that boring stuff you have to do in life, like passports and driving licenses and tax. Um, I often look at that and I think despite the fact that we often all hate doing it, and it is a grind and it goes wrong or whatever it may be, the actual interface and the way that their system is set up online has been getting better and better. And actually, I find it really quite impressive. It's so simple,
Mm.
and it is so. I mean, obviously, because they're dealing with people of all ages, of all cultures, of all languages, of all types, they've got to deal with the entire population. And so I can imagine the bureaucracy that's involved in creating that. And as a piece of design, it's probably not pleasant to do in any way. I can't
Mm.
imagine there's much pleasure in designing it. But as a piece of design, as a piece of you know user experience, whatever you want to call it, I thought I'm always impressed by that one. But so yeah, good design for me these days comes up in all the strangest of places.
Yeah.
Uh, and I find myself, as I say, is with age, is you admire things that you sometimes didn't. Probably when you're in your younger years, you probably would have gone
Mm.
like, "Oh, that's just boring." So it's a never-changing thing.
No, that's fine, yeah. So yeah, I'll begin.
Mm.
Um, so I think you've got the PowerPoint on the thing, haven't
I
you?
can
I'm on
see.
like the fourth slide now.
Yeah,
Can you see
yeah.
where I'm going on it? Can you see my mouse and things or
Nope. No, we're not
okay.
got screen sharing, but I don't. I mean, I can.
I'm on slide four, which is kind of
Okay.
the early thing. So
Old school.
what's this image to you? What is it? How did it become? What does it represent, you know?
What is it? It reminds me of working in a basement off of Oxford Street in my
Hmm.
first job from leaving Kingston. And I worked at a company called Green Ink. And it was, so we're talking, what are we now? I think it was 1990, 89, 90, 91. I vaguely, one of those years.
Yeah.
But I was there for about a year or so. And like I say, first job. And I'd I had been at college. I'd been drawing an awful lot of sort of rave illustrations. It wasn't. I don't know if it was the music that came first or just the fact I enjoyed doing that type of illustration. but it was just everywhere you went at the time. So it was just so ingrained in the culture, you know, the music and everything that went with it. So this was part of a record sleeve for a track called Rhubarb and Custard, which was a pretty annoying rave tune, but it was a big hit. It kind of top 10 or something. And it was for a record label called FFRR. And they used to come through the studio like nearly every day. It felt like these singles were just going out at such a fast rate. You didn't get an awful lot of time to sit and muse on, you know, like college days where you'd get a project and you'd have a few months to get through it. This, you'd have an afternoon and you'd have to come up with some stuff and then try and scribble something down, and then they'd fax that over to the label manager, and then it'd come back, and then they say yes or no or whatever. So it was a real quick lesson in the reality of being a designer as opposed to being a student.
Yeah.
And actually I enjoyed that process. I enjoyed the fact that it was fast and that you didn't have time to fuss and be too precious. And that was a hand-drawn Vicks Vapor Rub bottle, because that was part of the scene at the time. It was everybody was taking ecstasy and vapor rub on, and because of the fumes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, passing around bottles in the clubs, and so it was obviously trying to pick up on the whole sort of subculture thing. And so that was where that came from. It was a hand drawing thing, and then it just got scanned in. And the type on the sleeve though was pretty horrific, because again, Macs were really new, and most of the typography that you did was just not. It was like bending things on curves and ballooning them out, and it was pretty bad. You know, if it could just have been the drawing of the bottle and nothing else, it would have been a good sleeve. But there you go. So yeah, I managed to keep some. I haven't got a great archive, but I've managed to keep quite a lot of those old drawings.
That's nice. Yeah. Jumping forward.
Yes.
To the next slide. Just carry on, please.
Yeah, sure. These were a pretty big turning point for me, I suppose, both personally and professionally. And my friends were in a band called EMS. Now, people may have remembered the name from the sort of #1 hit, which was Unbelievable, which was it went #1 around the world, I think. And I was from the Forest of Dean. I was living in Gloucestershire as a kid, and these guys were from a town across the way. Everybody was like, got to go see this band, and they were all friends of friends. So started going to all these gigs, you know, in these pubs and these small venues. And turns out that they were about to get signed for a record deal pretty much straight away. I mean, it was like they'd done their first few gigs. EMI scouted them to sign a record deal. And it was not a surprise, because they were incredibly exciting live at the time. I mean, it was like a perfect mix of pop, rave, and rock music, you know, which was big as well at the time, like bands like Populate Itself and Shaman and guys Carter USM and people like that. But with EMF, it was sort of bigger and poppier, and it was more accessible. And also their roots in the rave scene were deep as well, because, you know, they were friends of all the DJs and people like that. So it was a really, really good time. And I just offered to do them some T-shirts, and they said, yeah, of course, yeah, why not? So I started drawing some stuff, and I was working in a factory on a summer job at the time, making Ribena, and I started drawing these things on just bits of paper that were lying around, and I was, you know, taking some influence from things I'd seen around and stuff like that, but it was more to do with the way they dressed and the way they looked. Like the lead singer had these big baggy shorts, massive Converse. It was all like baseball caps and big T-shirts, skater kind of vibe, early 90s skater vibe. So that was sort of the intention, was sort of like an image of the lead singer, and then just to get that sort of trippy, druggy sort of thing, but without it looking it was sort of trying to keep the rock edge to it as well. And that's where those came from. I pitched them to them, they loved them, and then they had to show them to their manager, because they just signed with EMI. And this was another lesson in the realities of music industry and business and the layers of people that something has to go through, because the band really liked them, but the management didn't want to do them for some reason. That's what I was told. So I was like, oh, never mind. I was a little bit like, oh, it's a shame, because I thought they would look cool. And they did go for another design that was really good, I think, but one of the band did it. So it was probably a lot of that was probably them wanting to do their own thing. So I kept the drawings, didn't do much else with them. Then one day I went off to Camden Market just before I graduated, I think. So they've been sitting around for a year or so, and I maybe do a couple more every now and again. And then I went to a store called Have a Nice Day in Camden, which was quite a popular store at the time that sold an awful lot of this gear, like skater gear that was really blowing up at the time. Massive full prints, arms, sleeve prints, back. I mean, it was like everything was really big and bold graphically on T-shirts at the time. I kind of see a little bit of that coming back now, because for a long time it was just nobody wanted to know about that. It was minimal, like a little emblem or something. And now a lot of that stuff I do see actually the younger generation, people in their sort of 20s and kind of hooking into a bit of that. I suppose artists like Billie Eilish and other artists may well have had a part to play. But it's definitely some resurgence of a style, but it's moved on a lot, So yeah, they are. The T-shirts then sold through this company, and they just blew up. They just went incredibly well. So it was actually a blessing in disguise getting turned down by the label, because I probably made. I mean, they probably would have sold a ton if they'd have taken them, but whether I would have seen any of that or not, I doubt. I don't know. Again, knowing how record companies are, I probably would have got paid a few £100 and that's it, see you later. But with these, and it was a great lesson I learned early, instead of just selling the design to the people that ran the store and saying, okay, they're yours, see you later, if you want another one, come back to me, I hung on to the rights of the design. And I was young and I was inexperienced. I think it was just, I can't remember why. I think somebody like a friend or somebody had sort of said, probably don't want to just give the designs up, see how it goes. So I wrote this very basic bit of like, yes, you can use them for these things, but I still maintain the rights in the design on a bit of A4 and kept that bit of paper. And as far as the future of those designs went, that meant that instead of me getting paid and then never seeing anything else, I ended up getting 20 pence on every single item that was sold. Now, actually, that was a bad deal. But at the time, it felt good. So, at the time, it felt good and I made some extra money. That's probably what matters, because in the end, what ended up happening after a few years of it building momentum and me doing various different designs, I'd see them once every 3 months or so. We'd meet up for coffee and they'd give me a check for a few grand. And that's just with 20 pence per item off everything they sold. So some things I probably could have done better with the deal, but really, I mean, I was quite pleased with that. Eventually, though, as all these things seem to do, a relationship soured. There were certain requests and demands made with the designs that I didn't agree with. I creatively would often disagree strongly with the people that manufactured the T-shirts, and they were involved. They did all the selling and the distribution, so they did an awful lot of the work of selling them. I did none of that. I just supplied them the designs. So they put all the legwork in and sold the T-shirts. But they would, after a while, start to say, no, don't design it like that. Do it more like this. I want it to look like that. And the more that happened, the less I liked the end product. And they started to look pretty bad, to the point where I just said, I can't do this anymore. It's not worth it for me. I'm happy with what we've done so far, but that's that's it. So yeah, it's I think they've been trying to restart up the business, because it was great, and then it like towards the end of the 90s, a lot of that stuff was not in style anymore. And they stopped doing it, stopped making them, and that was it. But they did very well out of those designs. I mean, they did a lot better than me, But I put a little bit of money away, and it was great. But they did very well,
Yeah.
and to the point now where I think they're doing them again. But it's just, unfortunately, it's just the relationship. I couldn't
Yeah.
quite get it going again. It was like, no, I don't
Yeah.
know. It's one of those pieces of design that unless I could be completely doing it without interference,
Mm.
I don't really want to do it, because
Yeah.
it was torturous.
Yeah.
And I see a lot now of younger designers, or even older ones as well, that have been through the career wheel, I suppose like I have, that are now being more self-sufficient and producing their own designs for themselves. Like, it's almost like sort of art. It is an art form, it's like illustrators, and they'll create their own merchandise, or posters, art, whatever it may be. I mean, there's a few guys I used to work with, like Super Mundane's the one that comes to mind,
Mm.
who I used to work with many moons ago, but he's more of an artist really than anything now. But now that does seem to be an ongoing trend, where rather than just working for clients, you just work for yourself
Mm.
if you have an audience
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah.
If those designs were done now, if I was the 20-year-old or whatever it was now, that's probably more the road that I
Mm.
would have gone down. Definitely with those sorts of designs, I would have probably held on to them a lot tighter and tried to do my own t-shirt business, or merchandise business with them. But it is what it is.
I could see them defo like my brain springs to mind like brands like Cortez and that I don't know if you know of, but
That
it
one?
kind of Cortez, I think it's Cortez, but that's
Sure.
like one of the big ones at the moment. But I
Mm.
think it just fall, the design itself, it just fall kind of in line with what they do. I think they're kind
Right.
of very, I don't know how to put it, like Supreme, but kind of a British Supreme,
Oh yeah.
but
Yeah.
kind of it's got a bit of a spin to it sometimes. The logo's Alcatraz, and it's got like they kind of mix it up and put a lot of different things
Okay.
on
I might have to have a look. Yeah, I mean, it's a style of design. I mean, again, there's a ton of different illustrations I did from that period of time, for t-shirts mostly, and for
it.
other
Mm.
things. That I sort of started to leave behind the further I got into the design career and working for Ministry of Sound. It used to crop up sometimes, but it's still something I'm quite fond of.
Yeah.
It's very playful and fun, but it's a fine line between it looking, cool on a t-shirt and it
Mm.
just looking really naff. And um, it it got to the point, like I said, with the people where I could see where they wanted to go with it, and I
Mm.
thought it's just not going to go. It wasn't going in the direction creatively that I was happy with. So you do need to keep quite a tight hold on that sort of stuff if it's if it's your sort of thumbprint
Yeah.
of what you do. Because I know when we last spoke, I was saying how I kind of was a little bit chameleon-y, like with graphic design in general. One minute I could be designing like that, next minute designing like that.
Mm.
And that's fine if you're a working designer and you want to make a good career out of it. It's good to be able to be adaptable and be able to sort of have different styles you can work in. But obviously that means then that you're not one of the designers like where you are known for a style that people come to you and only for that.
Mm.
And there's a satisfaction in that as well, because you won't waste any time um, having to have those awkward conversations with a client saying,
Mm.
well, if you wanted it designed like that, why didn't you go to somebody else?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's often what you want to say. And so if you do sort of really stick to your guns early on and continue with a sort of very specific look, then
Mm.
design clients will come to you for that look.
Yeah.
The only issue you have nowadays, at least, is that there are millions of people online creatively and designers that are all doing something probably very similar to what you do.
Mm.
It does seem that way. I mean, there's so many really, really good designers online, and it can be, you could probably spend a day like looking around and going, oh my God, everybody's doing the thing that I want to do. How do I stand out?
Mm.
So it must be quite a tricky world for a lot of younger designers now to actually make a good living.
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. And especially with, sites like Fiverr and everything cropping up and
Yeah,
AI now as well. You
yeah,
just ask a fucking
yeah,
AI to produce something now, don't you? And it'll spit something out which looks like that.
yeah.
But
And I know a lot of
mm,
people are, a lot of creatives are hating on AI and things like that. But you can say all you want, it's not going to go away, and it's
mm,
only going to get better. And it will mean that there's a massive thinning out of designers in general. Which, is that a bad thing? Possibly not. um does it mean that there might be a big swing creatively in how people do things? Yeah, I think definitely. And I probably think it's about time, because I think that it's like little things. I remember when I applied to go to design college, you'd go to your interviews and all that, and then there'd be maybe 20-30 places, maybe sometimes less, each year. So there's all they would take on for the whole year. And then later in life, I found out that sometimes, the admissions for 1 year were like 100, 150, maybe more, depending on the university. Again, please fact check me if that's true or not. But from what I could tell, the uptake in students, people that want to do graphic design as a career, was just going through the roof. And great, I mean, it is a really exciting career, but it's not. If you want to make a decent living out of it, you've got to really put in the hours. It is a grind. You've got to go through a lot of process and thinking, and the odd failure here and there. All the software and the AI in the world is not going to necessarily solve those problems for the designer, but it might put some of the less dedicated ones out of work,
mm.
which, like I said, maybe it's time.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, I'll jump forward. I might
I
skip
don't know.
over number six, number
BTKA,
seven.
or
Unless you want to, it's completely up to yourself. I'm just
that was
thinking
a
time
well that
wise.
it was part of the t-shirt world.
Yeah.
It was the same time, the Camden crew. I did a whole bunch of design. That set of designs was less me just coming up with it off of my own back, but me working with this chap who had an idea. But actually we got on quite well, so it
Mm,
it helped. You know, he was he was easy. He was nicer to work with. Me and him
yeah.
had a good creative relationship. I wouldn't say the end results are things that I would do today
Mm.
necessarily, but they're very much of the time. They have that sort of skatey kind of Camden Market kind of thing going on. But yeah, that's where they came from.
That's fine, yeah. Jumping forward again.
Go on. Yeah.
Next. I feel like I'm giving nothing to this whatsoever. I'm just kind of pushing
Sometimes
things
that's
along.
probably all. I mean, great for you. I mean, you jump in whenever. Honestly, I mean, yeah. Maybe I should slow down and give
No,
you
it's fine. Well, I mean, it's about your work, so I am just
Okay.
here as a facilitator, aren't I guess so.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. Okay. Yep. Uh, so the annual. Um,
Was this your first thing that you did for ministry? Is that
yeah.
correct? Yeah.
Uh, I when the t-shirt thing was going on, I was working at this company, Green Ink, which I think I said, which was just off the back of Oxford Street in a basement, and that was a good place to start, But after about 9 months, I was like young enough. I felt, well, I've done my time here, and
Mm,
I was the real junior guy, and I just wanted to find something a little bit more my thing. It certainly got me. Obviously, it was mostly music industry work, which I wasn't intending to do. It wasn't like a master plan to end up in the music industry,
mm,
and that's just the way it went. And I saw a job application for Intro,
mm,
which probably some people would have heard of. They're still going strong, I think, as far as I know. And I went to work there for about 3 years, and that was fantastic. Again, I think I mentioned it in the last podcast that it was probably a better education work going there than it was actually at university. It was, being surrounded by probably some of the best designers that I ever come across or probably ever will.
mm.
And that had pros and cons. The pros being you were just constantly you constantly had to lift your game, and you would also be learning a lot from them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it could be a little intimidating, and you'd feel a little bit like, man, God, am I ever going to get a lucky break here? You know, is it ever going to come my way? Well, it did with the Ministry of Sound, because that was the job that I got as a designer there that came to me. Because a lot of the time, like, a great brief would come in and it'd go to somebody more senior, or somebody with some more established credentials, you know, that had
Yeah.
proved themselves on other jobs. Well, fair enough, you know. So I got the ministry job, and I was like, yes, you know, it was like the most pretty, other than maybe a couple of other smaller jobs I'd done before, but this one really did for me feel like the right gig at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that was where that design came from for the first annual. I was working at Intro, but off the back of that, I got offered the job to go and work at Ministry of Sound
Yeah.
as one of the two designers in house.
Mm-hmm.
So they had two designers. One of those left. I took that job, and then I worked with the one that was left behind. It was politically, it was a little bit awkward to start with. I think I had nothing to do with it. It was just the way that they dealt with things over at Ministry of Sound, which could be a bit brutal at times. But that was, again, music industry. I mean, I think perhaps all industry, you know, sometimes the way things are handled are not great. But in the end, everything worked out just fine. So yeah, I got the job, and then I was at Ministry of Sound for on off nearly 10 years after that.
Yeah.
I mean, the design itself, the actual design for the annual, that is, well, it seems quite simple now looking at it, but it's a diary. It's supposed to look like a diary of sorts, you know, a leather-bound diary, foil blocked on the front there. Inside, it was a very expensive-looking piece of, you know, for CDs at the time. Packaging was everything, you know, how you stood out, especially with dance music compilations.
Yeah.
Everything was about what edge you could get on the shelves on the release for the packaging. So of course, Cream, Renaissance, all of those big comps. And the Ministry hadn't really put out yet a big prestigious compilation, and then this was going to be their sort of big step into that world. So yeah, it was a massive hit. And so they offered, like I say, they rang me up while I was working at Intro and just said, do you want a job here? And I was like, oh, you know, I mean, that was the sort of thing you don't expect, is to actually get offered a job rather than going out and having to, you know, knock on doors to find a job. It was exciting. You know, I was like, oh, you know, I remember that call. It was like, you try to play it cool, but, you know, I'm like going, oh, okay. And then you put the phone down. I'm sort of looking around the office going, you know, what was that? So
yeah, jumping forward on the slideshow again. To a couple of Frisky posters. I had a GIF, but it wouldn't load.
Okay.
It was from your Instagram, but go ahead, please.
If you do need any
assets and things,
yeah, I can send you some stuff. So
yeah.
So
when I was about, just as a side, by the way, I don't know if you'd be able to or anything because of just sort of licensing, but could you print like posters off from that time and sort of sell them? Because I assume there'd be a massive demand for them, surely.
No, I think that I would be in a bit of a quagmire.
Yeah.
I would love to. I have thought about it. But it's Ministry of Sound, isn't it? I mean, they've got, it's the logos, it's the lineups, it's their products. It's not like I've seen other designers from that period. You know, there's the guy that did all the stuff for Oasis, and he crops up online a lot, and he sells these because he wrote the words "definitely, maybe" in his writing, you know, for the sleeve. He sells these kind of he sells them, you know, with him writing, you know, stamped and signed, and he sells them, and he probably does really well out of it because he's the guy that designed the cover.
Yeah.
But he's not. Firstly, he must have a relationship with the label whereby he can do that. But it's just the words "definitely, maybe." It's not the whole sleeve. With the Ministry of Sound stuff, there are things amongst the archive that might be sellable.
Yeah.
But they might not be too happy about me selling things with Ministry of Sound logos on.
Yeah.
I know what they're like. They're quite litigious when it comes to things like that. And yeah, rightly so. It's their brand. I mean, it's not like I own the rights to the logo
Yeah,
to do with what I want. That's theirs.
Mm.
So, and anything really of any worth from that period, from Ministry days anyway, would have the logo on it.
Yeah, of course, yeah, of course.
So, yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I have thought about it, but then yeah.
It's probably too many hoops you need to jump through or
I
something, isn't
mean,
there? Or just
I could probably just pick up the phone and call them and say, "Would you be interested? Would you mind?" and all that kind of stuff. But I just haven't really done that.
yeah. No, that's fine. But yeah, Frisky posters.
Risky. It was early doors at my time working there, and they had this new Friday night that they were doing, which it was going to be, because the Ministry was very known for being a house music, very sort of hardcore sort of house music, very American, very sort of Chicago, New York, Detroit, all those sort of originators of house music that would often come over to the club as well. So I think it was probably a little bit intimidating for some people at the time back then. Ministry of Sound, it was a bit. I mean, I wasn't massively into clubbing. I certainly went to a fair few clubs, but I wasn't the sort that would be going out buying house music and knowing who the DJs would necessarily were at the time. It was just an experience, a fun night out, good laugh. But Ministry always felt like it was pretty serious about it all, and it was. But this night they wanted to lighten the load a bit, lighten the mood, and they wanted to go with what was big at the time, which was a lot more sort of a British vibe, a party vibe, like sort of. I think a lot of the DJs were much more, British DJs and stuff like that, and it was about collaborations, and it was a bit more, sparkly eye makeup, feather boas, and all that kind of stuff. It was much more camp and party like atmosphere as opposed to the other nights. So it was fun to get to work on. And I remember working with them on the name idea for the night. And then from there, that's where I started to sort of pull in some of those old illustrations that style of illustration that I did for the t-shirts. So probably one of the last times I actually did any illustration like that on a project was with the Frisky stuff. And it was just right at the time, it was still mid-90s. It was still a big sort of thing, still going very well. So yeah, they were fun to do.
What's the inspiration for? Is there an inspiration for the actual
little babies
themselves? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I was working at Intro, there was a guy there called Yanis, who was this American trained Greek graphic designer who came in, who was very much into the latest tech. He was the guy that was experimenting with all of the latest 3D animation stuff. This is going back nearly 30 years. I mean, he would sit there. I don't even know if he ever went home. I mean, sometimes he slept under his desk, and he was obsessed. I mean, he was totally obsessed with creating all these 3D models and things online. And it was quite amazing what he was doing for the time. He was ahead of his time in that respect. But it was hours and hours and hours of his time, and just to create one 3D model or something that looked pretty good. And he had to have all of the most powerful computers. I mean, there was like fans on the computers because it was all over heat and everything. But he used to have all these little toys on his monitor, and he used to have these little squishy baby toy things and I said, "Oh, where's that from?" And I think I bought one, and that was really where they came from, because the night was called Frisky, and the atmosphere of it was a sort of silliness.
Yeah.
There was a sort of silliness to the nights. It wasn't being too serious about everything, so they just seemed to make sense. And each month I would come up with a different type of. So the two of them there. That's Seb Fontaine and forgotten her name now. Heaven, is that her name? The resident DJs for the night. So it was just and then the Renaissance one is, I put wings on it because that was Renaissance. Renaissance always had like these very angelic sort of images for a lot of their stuff at the time. So that's where that came from.
That's class. Jumping forward again.
Yeah. Logical progression. That was funny. That's drum and bass night. That was LTJ Bookham is the DJ. And never really been a massive drum and bass fan, but it was big news at the time, and they started to do this night. I think it was on a Thursday even. I'm not sure if it was on a Friday or Saturday. It might have been a Thursday or even a Sunday. And met the management. His LTJ Bookham's management came in, and there were these husband and wife, I think, partner couple that came in, and they were so funny. They were like, "We just came into the room." That they came into my office. I had like a little partition thing, and they just came up and stood behind me and went, "Diesel." I was like, "What?" And I was working with my friend Tom, and we were like looking at each other. Who are they? You know, they just walked in. They're like, "Diesel marketing," and we were like going, "What are they going on about?" And I think that, I don't know if they just come from a big night out or something, but they were trying to brief me apparently on this night, and they just wanted to say that they really liked Diesel marketing, you know. But all I heard was Diesel marketing, and I was trying not to laugh. But you know, that was the way things got briefed. Sometimes you just get like a couple of words, and then they were off, they're gone, and I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing? You eventually, over a bit of time, you got the idea that they wanted to have a logo. So that was where the L and the P for logical progression came from. They, I think, apparently turned that into a podium, which I never saw. But I think there was like they built a series of blocks to make it like as a podium for the night. I never got to see it. I don't think I ever saw
That's
it.
pretty cool, isn't it?
They used to do a load of projections with it. I mean, it's a very complicated looking logo, really, but you know, I think it fits the drum and bass night.
Yeah, I think music's a space where you can kind of get away with doing things that you wouldn't like. Say if that's a corporate brand, they'd probably go
Yeah.
no. Do you know what I mean? But it's
to me,
like,
it's looking back now, it looks like a logo design that's about halfway there. You know,
yeah.
if I'd have spent, if I was really working, because that was done quite quickly. I
Yeah.
mean, if ever a third party came in, because they were part of Ministry of Sound, they were doing a night. It was almost like done as a favor to them.
Yeah.
Whether or not anybody got any money for doing it, I have no idea. I certainly didn't get anything extra for doing it, but they ended up taking that logo along with some of the other assets and doing massive global tours with it. So, and I didn't see anything for it.
Yeah.
So it was, you know, so I did well on the t-shirts, but then I kind of got taken for granted on quite a few other things. So there you go. But so yeah, they would come in, and then I'd say, "Am I doing?" You know, because they came in and did this weird brief, and I said, "Am I working? Am I doing some work for them?" And they said, "Yeah. Could you do a logo? They want some stuff doing, and then we're going to be doing flyers." I went, "Okay, I'll squeeze it in." You know, because there were only two of us, and we were doing a lot of stuff for Ministry of Sound. They were really churning out the stuff, and so yeah, I mean, it's quite a fun logo, and it's that. But yeah, after a few months of working with it, I was a bit like, "Oh God, if only I'd been able to just spend a bit more time working that through, I would be happy with it." But it's still all right.
Jumping forward again.
Yeah.
Whether these are in timeline, by the way, I have no idea. I just kind of bang them in.
Did you take them from the Instagram then?
Yeah. There's a point.
Yeah,
there's a point where it just completely falls off later on down, I think. But
yeah, it's all right.
It's fine.
Sessions 7. I'd not really this one in the open sleeve, which is on the next one on the slide. I'd not really found my feet yet stylistically. I don't think. I was experimenting with all kinds of different styles. Goes back to the thing I was saying earlier, and I've often said, is that I'd not really developed what I'd suppose call a thumbprint.
Yeah.
That was at least not for Ministry of Sound yet. So it was a bit of an experimental thing and finding it out on the job. You know, it was like, well, I'll do that for this project and see how that works out, and then maybe next time which a lot of brands nowadays wouldn't entertain. You know, you'd have to come out of the gate like with it all very polished, but you know, it did allow for a lot of experimenting and playing with formats. And I did really enjoy playing with the physical format of a CD. So how could we cover it, or what could we do? So that one was an acetate slipcase that was screen printed onto with the logo and the text. Underneath that is the inner booklet, which is printed on tracing paper, so that the design, when it concertinaed down, you could see all the way. So the picture of David Morales and then the text on the top of that is actually affected by everything that's behind it. So there's a grid on tracing paper is a square, is a grid, a very simple grid.
Mm.
And then as you put the slipcase on, the Sessions 7 text and the key line of that box and the Ministry of Sound logo, once the slipcase goes on, it sits directly inside one of those boxes
Oh, I see.
on the grid.
Wow.
So to get that accurately in the right place, I had to measure the tolerance of the box, not just the tracing paper, but the CD case, and try to make sure that the screen print for that. So it was quite a sort of worrying process of like, oh God, what if it comes back and it's just all in the wrong place? But pleasingly, it came back and it looked great.
Yeah.
But it was a very limited run like that because it was screen printed, because of the acetate, because of the tracing paper. It caused the production people a little bit of a headache, as you could imagine. And they certainly didn't like that if, they've got to produce God knows how many thousand of them. But no, I'm pleased with that one. It's not a style that I repeated. It was sort of felt to me like, okay, I've had a go with that. It was all faxes, like I suppose Tomato, of course, being the ones that led the way on all of that style, which was, stretching photocopies, distorted text. So it was sort of in a way my attempt at going down that path. And then after doing it, I did think this just doesn't feel like a Ministry of Sound way. Underworld and that kind of vibe, it sat well, it made perfect sense for some reason. But for me, I thought, well, firstly, I'm not going to do that because that's their thing. I'm not going to just straight up copy it. But even if I was using an element of that, I wasn't sure. It just didn't fit right. But I enjoyed doing that sleeve a lot. Everybody loved it and thought it was great. And so it was a happy time, Yeah.
Do you think, were you, when you design things, do you think you're more into kind of the craft and sort of the process, or more the final thing, do you think? It sounds like you like the process, I guess.
I think that what developed at Ministry of Sound over a period was the trust that I managed to get over time with the people that work there. So the label managers or the marketing people or the club promoters. There was often disagreements, but over time, the satisfaction really came from winning those little battles, and then ultimately getting to a point where that product came in, and everybody was, oh, look at this. And that to me was always the best thing, like when the product manager or the person that I was working with, because I'd be sitting there going, oh God, that thing's going to come in, and what if they hate it? But they would come in and they would be holding, going, look at this, and they'd be going around showing people. And I mean, that was just a fantastic feeling. So, and that was almost like that would happen every week because flyers coming and going, posters coming and going. Sometimes stuff would come back and you'd be like, oh God, But most of the time, it was people were very happy with the end result. So that to me, there's no better feedback. And I suppose again, a lot of graphic designers don't get that. Not on that sort of a level. It was because I was in house, because it was a fairly open plan and close knit team, and because of the friction that came with it, and so some of the craziness that was in that culture, it made the feeling that when you got something right and everybody liked it, it made it even better. Because you like, and then you go into a record store, go to Oxford Street, and go to the big HMV that was on Oxford Street, and see these racked up because they would just dominate a wall quite often. On release, especially the dance compilations, they would be like, you'd have Oasis Blur, and then you'd have Cream and Ministry of Sound. So it would be really prominent. And, that was the biggest thrill. But the actual process of design, I think the beginning bit is a bit torturous. I think that sometimes there were ideas and designs that I'd almost had before I'd got the brief, if you know what I mean, because you're working for Ministry of Sound and it's always Ministry of Sound. I'd be going, next time I get a comp to do, a compilation or something, I think I'm going to try and do something that's a bit like that. So over time, you'd be building up this little storage of little twists you could do with the packaging, or how you should probably deal with the type next time, or improvements, and you just keep banking that for next time. And you don't always get those opportunities as a designer.
Mm,
You know, quite
mm.
often it's just you're done, it's thrown out, next, and you don't always get the feedback, or when you do, it's not very constructive. So it was a great position to be in as a designer, to have that sort
Yeah,
of instant feedback.
yeah. I guess there's very few sort of roles where you'll get the chance to work on sort of a brand for that amount of time and sort of have that creative control with it as well, I guess is the
Yeah,
kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, obviously, there's an awful lot of in-house designers and various companies, but I think what was special about that, it was a high-profile brand, but it was very independent. It
Mm,
wasn't corporate at all. Maybe more so now, but I don't know. Doubt it. That it's that corporate. You know, it didn't have that hierarchical sort of so much sort of feeling. It was a little chaotic. It was a small team of people. It was very creative. Um, Yet it was a brand that was being seen by everybody. You know, it was on TV all the time. It was in every single store. Everybody was sort of talking about it at the time. It was, you know, so nowadays I can't think of a comparable.
yeah.
You know, it's like every time I always think of Oasis and Blur because they were big at the time as well, um, and Ministry and Cream and the like were the clubbing equivalent, and you know, Blur London
Mm,
and
mm,
Oasis from the north, and Cream and Ministry of Sound. You know, there was very like Ministry
yeah.
of Sound being Blur and all that. And even today, I mean, seeing if there's anything in the music world that's like that now,
Mm,
I struggle to think of, because everything does feel very much more. I'm not sure how to put it, as slick or corporate, because that's not necessarily true. It's hard to say. I mean, yeah, I mean, yeah, it was. I'm not sure if there's a brand like that at the moment that I can
yeah.
think.
No, I can't think of you not in the music space, I don't think anyway.
No.
No. Um, so yeah, jumping forward again.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Um, Open was originally was the Friday nights at, I think, was it Fridays? I think it was at Ministry of Sound, which again, like the house night, which was a lot of American DJs, like um, I've got a blank, like all the sort of oh my god, Todd Terry Todd Terry and people like Frankie Knuckles, and all those kind of big name American DJs. The Friday night was a much more harder sort of techno night,
Mm,
and that was, again, I thought, you know, quite an intimidating night. You know, I mean, it was like strobe light, smoke machine, and really hard sort of called techno
mm,
night. And but actually, musically, it was much more the thing that I was probably into. It's
yeah.
just a night that I might not have felt like going to, but still, the music was great. So that was a compilation for that label, which unfortunately didn't last too long. You know, I think it was a bit too niche for the club. That's why the Frisky night came along and sort of took over. It was a much bigger, more commercial thing at the time, you know, dealing with the sort of the way the charts were going as well, which was
Yeah.
actually a sign of things to come with the company in general. Whereas the open night was really underground. It was very, very cool. And that was a compilation. But me and the photographer, actually talking about the actual design, me and the photographer, Ben, it's a good old friend of mine, Ben Jennings, I worked with a ton whilst I was at Ministry of Sound. We just went off around London, photographing London landmarks, shops, stores. We just went off for a day or two with the camera and just on the fly and just photographed. And some he already has an archive actually, like, and the rest we just went around everywhere. Just, I mean, that was it. Just shops, because it's called Open.
Mm,
And then that particular sleeve was in an exhibition at the Barbican in London.
mm,
Surprisingly, I mean, again, I look at that sleeve now and I think it's a bit of an odd sleeve, but
yeah.
you know, I think at the time it was a popular compilation. Actually, as a piece of vinyl, it was quite fun.
Mm,
If you opened it out inside, there was just all these pictures, and then the
mm,
booklet more and more of these kind of reportage shots of London shops, that some of them, loads of those shops are no longer there anyway. So it's a little historical shot of parts of especially the East End. It's mostly the East End.
No, solid. Jumping forward again.
Yeah. The magazine. Weird time for me. I mean, because I was very comfy and happy in my little room at Ministry with what were now probably 4 of us. I think we went from just being me and Tom to there were probably around about 4 of us working in the design department by that point. Ministry had ambitions as always, and they wanted to start a magazine, and they partnered up with a company called Dennis Publishing. Now, Dennis Publishing were very well known for their sort of lads mag, not Loaded, but Maxim, which was even more lads mag probably than Loaded, if that was even possible. So that in itself was an issue for me anyway as a designer, because we had to please them as much as we had to please Ministry of Sound, and they were some of the most sort of brutal kind of client, that whole client experience thing. They were really difficult to work with in almost every way. I mean, it was like chalk and cheese. I mean, their particular world of publishing, they very much looked down on Ministry of Sound. They thought we were just a bunch of like kids running around, not knowing what the heck we were doing, like, no good at, and they were going to tell us how to do magazines, which in a way is true. I mean, we were like that, but at the same time, it was taken away from me. It was taking away the energy and the unique sort of thing that we'd built. And they wanted to go lads mag, and I just was constantly tearing my hair out with them, really not getting along very well with the people I had to work with from them. But the team that we had in house at Ministry, because they had to bring in a whole load of magazine people, we all felt the same. We were a really strong unit of people working together for Ministry, but every time they got involved, it ended in almost tears. I mean, it was like, God, the late nights and the booze and the partying got pretty heavy during that period. I mean, that was a lot of fun, but I think we were all just trying to cope with the stress of trying to launch a magazine, that was, I'd never done anything remotely like a magazine. I was, a designer with some experience under my belt by this point, but none at all in publishing. And it's a completely different beast to anything to do with music, as far as the design skills you need to put together a magazine. Fortunately, I managed to get an assistant that worked with me that had some experience on magazines, so I would rely on that a lot to say, well, can you help me with, because he had to help me with technical stuff to get the pages to look good, and I was always trying to think, does this look Ministry enough? Is this a good thing for Ministry of Sound? Ultimately, I don't think it was right for the brand, in my opinion. As far as what the end results are like, those 3 particular issues I was very happy with. I think I only worked on the first six issues before, again, I think they got a bit tired of me moaning. Maybe me moaning. I don't know if I had that much to do with them directly towards the end, but I think that they wanted to get some other designers in to give it a fresh set of eyes. And editorially and everything about it to me just felt so opposite to everything we were achieving on the compilation side. So eventually I went back to that, but it was fun doing the shoots. Obviously it's Kylie, Danny, that's Rona Mitra, who was I think she was a presenter on a TV show at the time or something like that. But that Rona Mitra one, the one with Killer Queen one, I wasn't that. They wanted the cover to be like that because of her chest, and to me that was like, oh, here we go. Whereas with the Kylie one, the Danny one, I wanted to make it at least something connected with music on the cover, as long as there was some connection with the cover star and anything to do with clubbing or music, which is why Kylie's got the headphones. Danny's holding the glitter ball. And on the Rona Mitra one, actually, on the inside shots, she's wrapped in like a disco rope light. She's got this rope light wrapped around, and she's kind of like supposed to be fighting with it. And they didn't want to use any of them on the cover. They said that one because of her
Yeah,
boobs.
yeah.
And to me, it was like, oh, geez, you know, that was. And I know they say it's a different time. It was a different time, the 90s. But even back then, it was like, really, is this what? I mean, and they were so insistent that that's
Yeah.
even to the point where they'd come in and sit behind me. One of the people from the dentist would stand there and go, just move her up a bit, you know, because we're going to put a CD here and you're covering her boobs, you know, can you move? And I'm like, it was like that. And I'd never really experienced it to that degree before. And that was infuriating. But like I say, I mean, I wouldn't have put them on my Instagram if I wasn't happy with overall the story and as a body of work for that period. But saying that, the parties that we went to were insane. I mean, they were so good.
Yeah.
All of the Ministry magazine periods, but it's a bit of a blur.
Yeah.
It was about a year or so I spent on the mag. I was still having to oversee all the other stuff as well, all the non-magazine things. Everything else still was going on. Club nights, the albums and single releases, and I wasn't physically really able to do any of the design for that period, but I was certainly constantly seeing what the other guys were up to because I had to. So that was busy.
No, it's fine. Jumping forward again.
Yeah,
I think this might be because I've been through your Instagram a couple of times. I think this might be a favorite design. Just going up and down. I really like this one personally, and I kind of like
Ruling.
Yeah, the ruling one. Yeah. Because then
yeah.
kind of the I guess the template, because you kind of use that for a couple of that kind of having the text on the right like that.
Whole series. Yeah, what we would do it seemed to be every 6 months or so, there would be this desire from the club to relook at the design. I would always want to try to maintain some continuity, so typographically, you know, layout and things like that. But we'd always have to be looking at how can we refresh the club promotion stuff. So, and I always was trying to, at least a little bit, keep some connection with what they were doing in the club to what they were doing on the record covers. But it wasn't always that possible. I think with Cream, they were really good at that. And I think one of the things, at least in the early days, is that Cream didn't put out a tremendous number of comps at the beginning. And they only had their certain club nights, whereas Ministry kept putting out more and more and more. I mean, the increase of singles and album releases was going up and up. And they would change the club nights quite often as well. And also, I was dealing with people that ran the club nights weren't necessarily always in the same room as, you know, or talking with the people that did the albums. And they'd almost say, no, we don't want it to look anything like the compilations, because they thought the compilations weren't cool enough. You know, the club nights had to be the benchmark. They had to be the aspirational, cool part of the brand, which they often were. And I got that. It's just the fact I was trying to just visually keep some, you know, because otherwise it would have just looked like two different organizations.
Yeah.
It's not that easy to keep them all. It was, anyway. So this ruling stuff, I worked with for the first time with a guy called Mario Godlewski, who is these days a really, really well known and respected still life photographer. He lives in New York. He does all of the stuff for Tom Ford fragrances, and he is as close as you think, probably say, as a sort of photographic genius as I've ever met, because he was doing stuff back then technically, not just with this sort of off the cuff hip sort of off the hip, you know, club stuff. He was doing a lot of other experimental still life photography of his own that was fantastic. I rarely got to use that work, but now I think he's sort of gone down that road with the likes of Tom Ford and stuff like that. But he does a lot of still life. But these were his club portfolio was really, really raw reportage from the hip, sort of just with a little Leica camera, obviously non-digital back then, all you know, film. And we'd go to a couple of club nights together, and he'd be sort of crouching down in the corner underneath a staircase, or, you know, behind the speaker. And I'd be sort of probably behind him with a drink like this going, what about that? And he'd be like, and so people didn't even know that he was taking the pictures. And that was completely the idea. And of course, this girl, if you look at that particular, you know, her pupil is quite
Yeah,
dilated.
yeah,
It says everything
yeah.
about it. And there was a whole bunch of, I mean, and they were, I think, you know, obviously, it's stylistically, it's not necessarily anything new because there's a lot of photographers and a lot of that sort of style. But to see that on a club, on a bunch of club promotion, I think was quite fresh. And
Mm,
did a whole series of flyers and ads with those. And no, they were really, I think I was really pleased with the way they ended up looking.
yeah.
And Mario was just great to work with.
That's class. Jumping forward again.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So number 14. Can I ask as
Yeah.
well? Do you know with the you squash the type a lot, is as in just the leading? Is there a reason
Yeah.
for that at all, or is it just kind of a
It's just a thing
stylistic
I
thing?
wanted to, yeah, I mean, not other than I wanted to, I was trying to design the club's guide, not this one, perhaps the first one, you know,
Mm,
it was an Ibiza, I think it was the first one.
mm,
And just working through the cover design and the font that we were primarily using at the time was Accidens.
mm,
And so I was doing my best to not get distracted by lots of other font choices. You know, it was
yeah.
like we made the font choice, we're using this on everything, but how I used it was still up. I was still like playing around with it. So,
Mm,
and I just, yeah, I think it was just one of those things. I just tried it one day and just tightened everything up. Went for the fatter and the bigger weights of it, and just brought all of the spacing down. Then started to do things like taking the dots off all the I's, try to remove punctuation
mm,
um, here and there, and just little tiny tweaks and things. And he just wanted to make that piece of text a solid sort of block.
yeah.
But without going again, I could have gone further with it. Could have gone to some extremes with it. But
Mm,
yeah, a little bit of restraint. A
yeah.
little restraint on that.
Yeah.
So that was just the period of time. That was the way that album ended up looking, and yeah, just like the way that all the type was touching and overlapping.
Yeah. Is there kind of any about the actual design itself? Because they're all real decks, aren't they, in the actual
Yeah, I
thing
mean,
as
not
well? Yeah.
that wouldn't work. That's not a functioning deck.
Yeah, yeah.
So I sometimes I'd work on my own on the sleeves. Other times I'd work with Tom, who was like my right hand man
Mm,
as far as the design was concerned a lot of the time. But he was more the sort of art direction side. So if I wasn't directly working on something, I would pass that job to him. And so he was working a lot on this one, and but we would sit and talk about ideas. And at the time, just before, in a year or two, whatever it was before that, Apple had just released a whole bunch of MacBook. I don't remember what it was called now. It was the Apple with the sort of transparent
mm,
plastic casing on it, like a domey sort of shape, and it had like different colors. And the adverts were all these spinning Apple Macs, you know, with all the different colored cases on them. Anyway, that was the influence for that. So once we were happy with that idea, Tom went away and found a model maker and got
mm.
them to make that deck out of Perspex in this green Perspex,
Uh,
which I'm so gutted that we never. I don't think it exists anymore. I think there were
that's
bits.
class.
I know it's just
I think you could turn it into, I don't know how many you'd exist because obviously there's loads of them that have been dumped into pools and on fire and everything, but just kind of an
yes.
exhibition of just the
Yeah,
CDJs or
well,
something.
Ben, it goes back
Yeah.
to Ben on this one, who my long-term photography partner that I worked with at Ministry of Sound more than anybody else. He would shoot all of these things. So he had all those photos and we did talk about it. But again, I think the Ministry did the odd little exhibition in the club, but nothing too big.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, as a series of just massive prints of some of those like early deck shots, it would be
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that particular one, all the detail shots on the inside were fun as well. Oh, and the other thing with it is the case. What I really liked was the slip case on the outside, as you can see, is just white
Mm,
with so to have that slightly Apple advertising kind of look, but the type is nothing like Apple at all. It
mm,
was just more the image. And then the case on the inside is a fluoro green plastic case for the CD packaging on the inside. So what was really nice was, you know, on the shelf, you could just get this little strip of
mm.
green shining through on all the shelves, which made it stood out.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, Sam, jumping forward again.
Yep.
Where you are, I believe you're just rebranding the actual logo itself,
Well,
and then
working
these
on
are
the
different
logo, yeah.
options. Yeah, yeah.
It's been through, I think, a couple of iterations since, but this was the first time the conversation was ever had to redesign the logo. And at the time, it was a case of possibly completely redesigning the logo.
Mm,
And it wasn't a given that I would be doing it. It was a case of I was going to write the brief and then pitch it out to a bunch of agencies around London, which we did. Took a few months to do that because you've got to arrange meetings, you've got to go there, you've got to talk to them about it, you've got to wait for their feed, wait for them to come back to you and all that kind of thing. So after sort of around a few months of back and forth with probably about 5 or 6 different agencies in London,
mm,
I mean, they didn't pitch any designs. It was literally just me going in, talking about the project, talking about what their thoughts were on it, and then getting back to me with their thoughts, as in, would they be up, and that was that kind of thing. I wasn't sort of putting it out as like a free pitch or anything. It was more just to get the ball rolling. But meanwhile, in-house, we were talking a lot, and ended up deciding that it would be better done in-house.
yeah.
So, sorry to those agencies that have wasted their time, but we hopefully didn't waste too much of their time. So we brought it in-house, but I did collaborate with Dalton Marg. And Dalton Marg, I think, still going to this day. I think, real type specialists, real
Mm,
typography aficionados. I mean, they're the best of the best.
mm,
Worked with them on the font for the Ministry of Sound on the curve. And then in-house, I had one of the designers work with me was Peter Sunner. He's better known now as 2D Pete on Instagram. He's fantastic. His 3D stuff he's doing, if you want to check him out, 2D
yeah.
Pete on Instagram is phenomenal. And he was a Swedish designer that came to work with me in-house. We've grown a little bit bigger by this point, by the way. In-house, it
Mm,
was getting close to nearly 10 people
mm,
from just me and Tom. So it changed, and the dynamic had changed a bit. I was still running it, but it
yeah.
was, yeah. So I was working really closely with Peter Sunner and Dalton Marg. And so Pete Sunner worked an awful lot on the physicality. He would be the one putting together all these different, I'd say, what about some just work on the portal, just work on that, because we wanted to refine the logo. We didn't want to change it. We decided we're not going to go and change the logo, not completely change it. We're going to work with it and improve it so that it can work on, bearing in mind that online websites and mobile phones had only just started kicking off. So we needed something that worked better in that environment, because the
Yeah.
original logo was really, really proving to be difficult on screens at a certain size.
Mm,
So there was partly, it was to do with that thinking, that if we can make this so that it renders much, much better at different sizes.
mm,
So, but then, yeah, bit by bit, it transformed into the new logo, what I call it. Because then if you go to slides 16, 17,
mm,
16 is using the original Ministry of Sound logo, which I've not done anything to whatsoever, which was originally designed by a company called Third Planet.
mm,
It was the company, I can't remember the name of the actual chap who did it, because I think he does sell prints of that or something.
mm,
I don't know. But I think that Designers Republic, they did a sleeve for Ministry of Sound before I joined.
mm,
And they just literally vectored it into freehand, because it was just a drawing
mm.
that had been scanned in, and that was the logo that they were
Oh,
so actually Designers Republic spent weeks apparently redoing it all in freehand. So at least there was a version you could use that you could change the color on and stuff like that. So that annual 2002 is the one that still uses that one, but the slide 17 is
yeah,
the following year,
yeah.
when we started to use the revised version,
Mm,
which is where you can see the difference. It was about
yeah.
tightening up the shape, because the one on the 2002 version, if you were to blow that up into a square, it would be an awkward fit in a square, the way it
Mm,
sits. Whereas the slide 17, the idea was that it would really sit well in the middle of that shape,
mm,
amongst other things.
mm.
And then the idea of it being huge like that was because I got fed up with everybody saying, make the logo bigger, because that's all they bloody ever said. So on that one, I went, right, sod you, I'm going to make it as big as I can. And the actual text is a sticker that went over the top of the logo. And it was around that time I realized that there was no need to keep showing the whole logo all the time. Everybody knew that Ministry of Sound logo, it's very unique in that respect, and which is what is good about it. As difficult as it is to work with, it is unique. So at least in that world, and it's memorable.
Again, one of the kind of the few heritage brands where you can get away with that. I know there's like the EasyJet. I don't know if you've seen where they've kind of cropped
I
it.
saw that recently. Funnily enough, you should mention that. Because every time somebody posted that on LinkedIn, I kept posting my Ibiza poster that I did.
Is it the one where it's like a cherry and then it's like
because if you close in on the corner of that, I really enjoyed doing that particular poster, which I that is probably one of the most pleasing things I ever ended up doing at Mystery Sound, which is weird because it's so basic and simple. For those reasons is why I like it. Is if you close in on the corner of Ministry, of course, it says try. So what I did was just chop the corner of the Ministry logo onto that big billboard in Ibiza. So all it says is try. And then you've got a bit of the crown from the logo and a bit of the portcullis. And then it's got Fridays at Pacha. So it's just supposed to be, I know it's not, it's not supposed to be, oh, I see it says. It's just one of those ones because people driving around Ibiza go past the same thing over and over and over again. And then, of course, the flyers all had it on try. And I really like the idea that everything just said try on it. And it was an idea I wanted to run with a lot more on a bunch of club stuff. And I had sort of these thoughts about how we could start to subvert the logo without being too crazy with it, like just chopping corners into the, extreme close-ups rather than, trying to be very subtle with it. I wanted to go almost the opposite. I wanted to go big type, massive crops on logos and be more brutal on that, which funny enough, I see a lot of design trends now with a lot of animated, augmented type. Very exciting with the type sort of splits and pushes to the edge and then it comes back in, and it does remind, that is very, very much influenced by a lot of early 90s rave culture stuff. Totally.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I like it. I mean, and of course now the technology is so much better that people can animate it to that extent, just themselves, rather than having to pay a fortune to a post-production company to do it, which is would have been in the past. That's kind of where I could have. I mean, I think Ministry are probably doing that stuff now. I know Defected do a lot of stuff like that. Probably that, had I still been there, that would have been a sort of route to go down. Something a bit more brutal would have been fun to have a go at.
That's nice. I think I said EasyJet and I meant British Airways, obviously.
Well, EasyJet did it as well as a comeback to. They actually did. Well, Coca-Cola. See, the thing is that it was Coca-Cola that did one of the first ones back in the 90s or maybe in the 80s or whenever. When they did some billboards in London, I remember seeing them and really, really liking them, where they had the massive Coca-Cola, but they zoomed right in on the logo, so you just saw the swooshy bit. And it wasn't Nike, it was obviously Coke. And I just like how they were, there was nothing else on the poster. It was just maybe had a little logo in the corner, and that was it. And I thought that was a brave choice for a brand like that to do, to say that you don't need to see everything. You know who that is. The same with British Airways and all that. So that's what we were doing. I was trying to do with Ministry for a bit.
It's interesting how it's like just the power that you have to have in the brand to execute something like that, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Just sort of the leverage that you need to do it, and just
It's I mean, the thing when I see pieces of design like that is not so much like, wow, how good is the designer that did that, but more so how much they probably had to convince the powers that be.
Oh God, yeah.
To get it through. I mean, that to me says more about the culture of the company than anything. That maybe actually it's quite brave of them to go ahead and go, okay, we're going to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on a campaign that's just this thing, but often they're the most memorable.
Did it take a lot of convincing to you be able to crop it like that, or were you in a position where at that point where it was
By
kind
that
of
point,
like,
I was in a position where, I mean, I don't know about convincing. I would just keep firing different things at people, and
yeah,
if they hit, they hit. You know, I mean, it was such a high rate of output of work that obviously what I decided to choose as my favorite, the things I like and the things that were successful. But you know, there's always the dodgy stuff and the things you'd rather not talk about. So there was plenty of that as well. But to be honest, it became more about the hit rate than it did about the failures. So
mm,
over time, you just gain the confidence, as I say, of the people you're working with, and then you get on a roll.
mm. There, class. Jumping forward again, another deck. This one,
Yeah.
there's no. I assume it's. I mean, it's obvious, but there's no capital letters. I assume it's chill
Oh
out,
gosh, yeah, yeah. I
no
mean, it was
capitals.
just going. Yeah, just. I think you try to refresh in a little way.
Mm,
Like this was the chill out session, so it's not the annual.
mm,
It's not whatever other release had just come off the back of. So you would just tweak the typography a bit, and then just sort of give it its own little quirk
mm,
graphically. But no real massive reasons there. But no, we just went for all lowercase.
mm.
Can't remember the exact reason why. Just did.
Yeah.
But again, Tom worked on this one, and chill out was a big, massive thing at the time. TV adverts were all about chill out sort of music and everything else, and so Ministry were doing big with the compilations, and these were huge for them, chill out sessions. And it was one of these ideas when I was talking to Tom about it. I think he suggested this when I was like, yeah, of course, that'd be brilliant. You
Mm,
know, who's going to do that then? How are you going to do it? And then it takes a long time to do
yeah.
that, you know, because what you got to do is to be able to keep the ice completely pure so that it's not clouded and there's not like you can see through it.
Mm,
Is they have to do it specialist tank in a specialist water, and over time, you know, you can't just put a load of water in a tank and then drop, you know, but you've got to like to get the deck to sit in the ice
mm,
and then get the ice to be crystal clear like that was quite a process. So it would take
mm.
them probably about a week to do it.
Well,
And then they'd be shipped off to the photography studio. And this was in a massive, I didn't get to go to the shoot, couldn't go there at the time, but I heard it was amazing that that was a big tank of water in the
mm,
studio. And then the deck was put in. But of course, what happened is the deck would keep frosting up.
mm.
So they'd have to keep kind of like clearing the ice of the deck so that you could actually see through it and stuff. So yeah, that was a beautiful shot, that one.
I assume that the budget you must have had for this sort of stuff because it's just kind of like, I mean, it's mental, isn't it?
There was a period where budgets were reasonable. I mean,
Yeah,
because we were in house, of course, they're not spending a fortune on an agency.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Photographers were getting paid a decent ish amount. I
Mm,
mean, they probably don't get as much to do stuff for Ministry of Sound as they do for some of their clients. Like Jonathan Knowles did this shot, and he's a very well respected still life photographer and advertising, does a lot of major
yeah.
advertising campaigns still to this day. Um, and he loved working on them though. I mean, he was great fun to work with as well, but he
Mm,
took these as seriously as anything else he ever did, and he would, you know, really go for it with the setups and make it work in
mm,
camera as
yeah.
much as possible. The only bit of retouching that was done on that was the little bit of spark of light on the
Mm.
corner. So yeah, testament to his skill, really.
No, it's close.
Yeah.
Again, just like can you imagine an exhibition somewhere, a very Damien Hirst thing, big deck and a
Yeah,
block of
true,
ice
true,
in the
true. I
middle,
mean, you know, you know, it would be wonderful, and I could happily curate and direct an exhibition of Technics. But the Technics, funnily enough, Pioneer and Technics never once gave us a free deck. Every
You'd
single
think
one
for
they
the
did,
advertising, wouldn't you? For the
every
ad?
single no, they wouldn't. They didn't care.
Well,
They were like, no. I mean, I didn't call them up and try myself, but I know other people did, and they just said, "Oh, no, not getting anything from
well,
them." And so we would have to take actual, because they're about £500 or so
mm,
back then, and they're more now. Started making them again. Um, and we just completely wrecked them. So, like, you go to the club promotions, but the club team, and go like, they were like, not another one, because it's sacrilege, really, isn't it? To
Yeah.
trash them. Yeah.
Yeah, jumping forward again.
Yeah. Paradise Garage.
Mhm.
This right. So how could I got to the point at Ministry of Sound where I was a little frustrated with only working for Ministry of Sound. I would get inquiries from other companies to do work for them, not as a employee, but to do, could you design this for us? And so, and a lot of record labels that Ministry of Sound was associated with, or ended up buying, because they would often buy other record labels up. People move jobs, they go and work at another label. They just say to you, do you want to work on this sleeve or whatever it was? So eventually, fortunately, we managed to kind of get a situation with Ministry of Sound where they would allow us to work on third-party design work, and it operated a little bit more like an agency. So we got account handlers, we got more designers. With that comes stress and troubles, which maybe weren't always worth it, but at the same, just because you're managing more people, and then that can be tricky. But at the same time, it did enable us to work on non-Ministry of Sound work, which I think the guys appreciated that in-house, because it just meant that they didn't always have to be. I think I personally didn't find it. I like just working with the one brand, but I think that I could see that I would get better designers in if I could enable those designers to sometimes work with non-ministry stuff as well.
Yeah.
And there was a bit of that as well. And I think we were just in a position where we could do that. It was like, so we did start to pitch out on a few things, and Strut Records was an old friend that I'd done some work for before, and he was starting up a small label, and we started working with them. And Paradise Garage, as far as the design is concerned, it was less of a design, more of a sort of problem solving thing for me, because the logo was already there, it already existed. It's a piece of history. But what I loved was when the client came in, he was wearing one of their t-shirts, and it was glow in the dark UV t-shirt. And so I said, could we do that? Could we do that on the sleeves? We'll have to have a look into it. And so it was screen printed sleeves with UV ink. So it was a UV ink, then a black. They had to go like a double hit of black over the top, and just the pink sticker in the corner. I mean, Paradise Garage was a gay club at the time, predominantly a black crowd, very much one of the original. I mean, the term garage, Paradise Garage, and garage music and all that sort of stemmed from that. Larry Levan was the main DJ. As a mix, as actually as a non-design point, as to listen to that album is brilliant. It's so good. It's taken from an original recording from like it's the late 70s or early 80s, from one of his sets. So it's, some of the mixes are a little bit but it doesn't matter, because the music, choice of music on it and everything about it is brilliant. It's like, if you think disco is this kind of cheesy sort of period, you listen to that and you can totally hear in that mix the transition from what was disco into what we now know as house or dance music, because it's all going on there. It's brilliant album. But as a piece of design, it was great when it came back, because I had a copy in my vinyl collection, and like at night when you turn the lights out, the spine glowed in the dark, so you could always see it. So that was nice.
That's cool. Jumping forward again.
Yeah, still quite a few here.
Yeah, sorry.
All right, let's see how we get on. What we got? 2:30.
I'm fine. I am. I'm
fine,
enjoying it.
fine.
I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
All right. What do we got here? John Peel. Actually comes a little later down the line time wise, but it's fine. I'd left Ministry of Sound, and I'm trying to think, had I been traveling? I took a year out and went traveling, and when I came back, I did a little bit of freelance work, and some of that was for Warner Music. For Warner Music. I always get them mixed up, all the major labels. And this was the one bit of work I did out of that short period, which I was pleased with, which was the John Peel compilation.
Yeah.
The brief was sitting on a list of things to do, and I just wanted to work with Peter Blake. I don't know what made me think of him particularly, but I just thought that to get a portrait done of John Peel by an artist that was of his generation would be great. That was all that was singing, is that I want somebody that I feel is an equal, like an icon in the art world as John Peel was to music. And I couldn't think of anybody better than Peter Blake, because of course Sergeant Pepper's, he was doing a bunch of stuff with Paul Weller and Oasis and various other bands at the time. And so the record label were like, well, how are you going to get Peter Blake? They were very like, before he even had a conversation with an agent or anybody, they were like, he's not going to do that. Why would he do that? I said, well, I don't know. We'll ask him. So I spoke to his agent, because he has an agent for his illustration and then an agent for his art. And then he just, if he's available and he wants to do it, this is back then. I mean, he's very, very old now.
Yeah.
Back then he was still active, as in he would do a commission if he wanted to. It wasn't like he did everything that came his way.
Yeah.
So when I told the agent to tell him, and here's the brief, and then we wait, and then he came back and they said, yes, he'd like to meet and talk about it. So you go in, meet, and he's a lovely, lovely guy. And got to pitch him, and all I had was a few photos from the family. That was the only photos they were happy with me showing as well, for some reason. But like, they were like, oh no, we don't want that one. Well, they had a little envelope of pictures to choose from, and Peter chose that one. I let him make the choice. He liked that one, and then he went away and said, I think what I'll do is a watercolor, and I said, okay. I was very much like in his hands, really. I thought, I'm going to let him lead this. All I want to know is a rough idea of how that's going to frame up for the sleeve, and just pop back in for the odd meeting. So that was it, really. What was a funny thing at the same time is they were doing a TV documentary on the South Bank. The South Bank Show was the TV show. And they were doing a documentary on Peter Blake at the time. So every time I turned up, there would be a camera crew there. But there was a couple of bits of me being filmed talking to Peter Blake. So, and I was always a bit like, nervous. But anyway, I'm very pleased with just the fact of working with him.
Yeah.
That's all. That was really the main thing for me, was like, I got from that was fantastic, just to get to meet him and work closely with him like that.
Yeah.
Everything else was a bonus.
Lovely. Topping forward again, I assume going backwards then, if that was your time after
Yeah,
ministry.
I mean, that's fine. It's another one of the Clubbers Guide jobs that me and Tom came. The decks became very much a collaborative thing, because they were big projects. There were a lot of people involved. They became big successes for the company, and they were expensive. And so you'd have a big kind of team involved talking about it. And so me and Tom would talk about these a lot. Tom would, we'd work on an idea, we'd bounce them back and forth, like I say, and we'd agree on something that would work. And this was one to do with the sports Walkman. You'd have to put a bunch of mood boards together. So you were presenting in-house with these like you were pitching as an external agency almost. You put the mood boards together, you go and present them to the label. And that was that one. And that was shot by Jonathan Knowles again. And they would just repeatedly drop the thing into the tank. It's another one that's a real shame that is not it exists anymore. I can't believe that. Oh, they would be so cool to have those now. I think maybe the odd part of them exists somewhere, but not the whole decks. And all the close-ups were lovely, because all the close-ups on the bubbles and everything. But also it was quite good. I was getting very much into creating these very tight grids with all the typography inside as well, because they were putting more and more content into them. Those little booklets and tons of content. So just trying to get a really strong grid system working on the typography as well.
Yeah. That's lovely. It feels very like British Swiss. Is there kind of like
Brit Swiss?
Yeah. Do you have kind of influences from kind of that kind of area, or?
Well, other than the fact that I've always greatly admired that sort of design, I wouldn't say I'm practiced in any style myself. It was I think, go back to a chap I mentioned, Peter Sunner, Swedish chap that came to work with us, who'd had an incredible typographic training,
Mm.
and is an exceptional typographer. But these days he tends to do it more in the 3D world. I mean, if you go to that 2D Peter I mentioned, he probably was the most influential for me to tighten up my type game. I wasn't shabby by any stretch before, but working with him closely and sort of talking to him about it, was where I think it sort of improved my typography. Again, I may have mentioned this before. I think that he certainly I think it worked both ways. Like we as a little studio of designers were quite loose, and there was a certain humor to the whole thing. There was always a little bit of cheekiness and humor within the design as well as in the atmosphere in the studio. So he kind of, I think he benefited from a bit of that, because some of his designs, even now, if you look at these 2D Pete stuff, I love some of the humor he puts into these very, very clinical pieces of design. So it's Swiss, yes, it's clean and clinical, but there's this little bit of humor in there, which I think makes all the difference from something being sort of dry and boring. So with these, I mean, the imagery and the fact that it's a dance compilation, of course, but keeping that very tight style typographically. Plus, you're dealing with a tiny little square of paper.
Yeah.
So, you're kind of restricted to what you can do.
No, fair enough. Jumping forward, these last couple are kind of mainly just for the logos. Because obviously the Data logo.
Data logo, that was the guy that was working with us, Matt Dixon. He was tasked with that logo, and I remember when we did the first couple of sleeves, we really wanted to die cut the logo out of the outer sleeve. I think we may have done one like that before they stopped it because of cost. But it did look lovely.
Die
cut out, and it's DATA, so that's obviously what the dots are. They make up the word data very abstractly, and a lot of big successful tunes came out on that label at the time. Massive hits. And actually, typographically, it started out one way, and then sort of after a while there was the other label, Substance, and then there was another one, Ruling label, and they came out at different times, and I realized, oh God, I really need to try and bring these together regardless of the logo. I need to try and create a structure for them. So we started to make them color and layout wise sit together as best we could. But yeah, house bags is what we call them, as in a label bag for numerous releases, and they would come out at quite a rate. There'd be a lot of different ones. So you'd just be change of color, slight rearrangement of text, trying to keep everything as tight as possible, and that was it really. But what happens, nicest things with that kind of work, is over a period of releases, when they're all together, it makes a nice wall of color, like squares. I mean, in isolation, sometimes some designs are a bit like, yeah, that's okay, but actually over time, that's funny. I suppose that's the thing about it, a lot of stuff I see online now. This is not to say it's bad, but a lot of graphic designers make their work they put it in a context that's so amazing, like be it an animation, or they'll crop and they'll put it together in a form that you're not, in a sense, looking at the work, you're looking at the presentation of the work.
Yeah.
Like the presentation of the work is almost overpowering the work itself. So there are these things that whiz about and you're like, but actually, when you look at if you were to pull out the one piece of work from that presentation and just look at it in isolation, it'd probably be very, very simple. But once it's layered up with a whole load of other things, it whizzes by you. It looks like some crazy animation. But same with these house bags. Individually they're very, very simple. Once you've got like 10 or 15 of them all together, it started to really take shape.
Jumping next, you did kind of touch on it, so I don't know if there's anything to go on, but kind of the Substance logo and kind of the.
Yeah, I enjoyed that one. That was a good. I like that one because just the way it's stacked. So the sub and then starts, and the grid of the letters. That was really it, really. And then just use that grid of letters to align the text from. And very, very satisfying. I think the only thing with that label is they didn't do many releases, so I didn't get a chance to really explore it. Shame, because I really liked the logo and I really liked the way it looked on the sleeve.
Is there a reason they were done as like separate, like things like that, as opposed to not just being a big Ministry of Sound logo and then just like
they did that in the very early days with the club, but the thing is that the record labels started to splinter off in these smaller little genre groups, and so one would be like, oh no, this is you know, techno, this is house, this is more garage, this is drum and bass, this is, I mean, they just wanted to do all the different genres, and they felt that each one needed a different identity.
Yeah.
There could have been different ways to have gone about it, but I wasn't really involved with the label, that sort of level of label decision. That was up to them. They would come to me and say, right, we've got a label called Substance now.
Yeah.
And we've got Ruling, and we've got Frisky and Open and Sound of Ministry, and they would be just always happening. There could have been an argument to say that was sometimes unnecessary. It could have just been Ministry of Sound, and there could have been another way of signifying the differences. But that was not something I was really involved with. So the Defected Records identity, it was one of those projects. This was before I sort of managed to form more of a sort of agency within the building of Ministry of Sound. So I was kind of a paid employee eventually, but also kind of had this agency, which in hindsight was possibly not the best arrangement, but it did, like I said before, enable us to work with other brands. But this particular job happened before any of that. This was quite sort of fairly early days whilst I was at Ministry of Sound, and Defected Records was a brand new record label set up by this guy, Simon Dunmore, who was a A&R guy from another record label, signed a load of major dance music hits at the time. And he came in and briefed the job, and I went away and worked on this logo. And the principle for the design of the logo was designed around the 12-inch sleeve. So what that is the center label of the vinyl, and then there's a white inner bag which has got a die cut center, so you can see the inner label of the vinyl. And then there's another, so of course it's got two sleeves on it, which, you know, an inner bag and an outer bag, not abnormal, but actually a bit of a luxury when it comes to 12-inch singles and the like. Back then, you know, it's an extra cost. But nonetheless, we did manage to get that one to go through. And that was what made the dig of Defected. So I really liked that as a sort of a logo that was derived around a 12-inch single, which its core is what the fan base is all about, you know, 12-inch vinyl, house mixes, etc. So for me, I love the sort of connection that logo has directly with the culture, but with the 12-inch sleeve. So I'm very pleased with that. And then, of course, you know, you can see on the center actually there is the logo. It's changed since then. I mean, you know, music industry can be a little fickle. They do like to change the logos. I think that what they're doing now, because it's Trevor Jackson who's now their main designer, and of course, I mean, back when I was a student, he was sort of one of the designers that I was always a bit in awe of, really. You know, he was one of those designers when I started out, at least anyway, the early 90s, and he was kind of hitting his stride. He was probably just a few years older. Was already out there working, and a lot of his stuff at the time was like the stuff, you know, along with Designers Republic and everybody else. Trevor Jackson was another one of those, that kind of crew, and he does that now. So good on him. But still, I've got a special fondness for this particular identity, and I know other people do too. In fact, I think they still occasionally put out merchandise with what they call the old school logo on, and apparently it still sells rather well. So you know, at least that's testament to, I suppose, that it worked. Yeah. So that was the Defected one, because I know I go on about the fact that I'm not really a topographer, or I wasn't my speciality, or I wouldn't say that I was connected in a particular style of typography. I think that typography was always at the core. It's silly to sort of say that, and then at the same time sort of say, well, actually, I really love just pure type
Yeah.
done well. And with this particular strain of what we were doing, it was really a bit of a relief to be able to get to a point where you could do something like a club advert that had literally nothing but type. No imagery, no club imagery, no bright pictures of the beach or the girls in bikinis or Ibiza or all of the other stuff. Even decks, we would sort of, everybody was like, actually, I'm trying to think if this is before or after the turntables. I can't remember. Maybe in 2001. Yeah, it was around that time. But ruling as a night was still at the core of what Ministry of Sound originally was. And I know I stumbled over a bunch of DJ names, which is a bit embarrassing the other day. But as you can see by some of the names on there, like Todd Terry in particular, all of those sort of DJs were at the core of what Ministry originally was about. And having a black and white ad, a lot of the first ever flyers that went out, not just from Ministry of Sound, but from a lot of the sort of early clubs, were black and white because they were cheap.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I liked this, to me, along with the try, with a bold white try, was a direction I was keen to have gone further down, which would have been more minimal, possibly, than even the likes of Cream. And because everything they did, I suppose you could call minimal, but there was always a sort of an image attached. There was always some kind of a concept, an idea. And I kind of like the idea of stripping everything completely and being it's almost zero ideas, like Jerry Seinfeld. There was just, the idea was that it was just to be all the information delivered really well, but in a way a homage to the very, very first flyers, the very first club nights, with its minimal two color. In this case, it's got a grad on it as well.
Yeah.
And so that's one of my favorite club ads we ever did. So, I say I'm not really a typographer, but it's always been at the core of everything I do.
You're really good at it as well. You are a really nice typographer. You know what I mean? That's
But
set
again,
really lovely.
I mean, I learned on the job. I didn't come out of college being a good typographer at all. I mean, even though the place I went, Twickenham and Richmond, was renowned for good typography, I didn't particularly explore that enough or I think that I came in at the beginning of the Mac and at the end of the hand sort of set type, and I had a real bit of a fear and a phobia of the whole mathematical side of typesetting back then, which it was. And of course, Mac, when I got my first job going back to Greening, Macs would only just started to hit industry. And the company I was at had some of the first and best Apple Macs, and they would overheat and break down a lot and crash, and they had hardly any memory, and they were huge and everything else. But so I learned then how to really work on a Mac. A lot of the stuff I did was hand drawn before that, like the t-shirts and things, which was probably why I didn't go down that road more with illustration and t-shirts, was just because I got into working on Macs and worked in design studios, then to Intro, which I said was the real education, working with the people there that were very, very strong at typography. Because Intro was interesting again because they had a corporate aspect to them. They did some annual reports. They did very, very corporate design work at one end, and then the other side, they ended up, doing things like reggae sleeves and Primal Scream and loads of music stuff. So they had the both worlds going on simultaneously. It wasn't a big company.
Yeah.
And I think that influenced me a lot in the fact that at one end, you'd be speaking to one of the senior guys there who was very, very meticulous about all these details in the typography. And then at the other side, you had the sort of experimental, sort of taking photographs of really odd things, running them through fax machines and photocopiers and making all kinds of imagery out of it, or hand-drawn illustration. So they really kind of had this mishmash of stuff, which really influenced me.
Yeah.
And then when I went over to Ministry of Sound, the first couple of years, I was trying to piece it together for myself, but I think Tom, who I work with, would totally agree. He's not a typographer either. So it's not like I went into Ministry of Sound and had somebody to fall back on, say, right, we've got a ton of projects to do. You do that. I've got to go away and think of some ideas. You know, it wasn't like that either. So we were bouncing off each other. You know, he was very strong ideas. You know, and he was, but I was also helping him with his typography as well. So we sort of, it wasn't until I brought in other designers who I thought had a specific skill set that I then started to sort of, the penny dropped, and the way it all meshed together worked very well. And you can't help but pick it up, you know. So yeah. I mean, I think that, yeah, I love a typography for sure, you know, but I'm not a geek when it comes to typography.
That's
Just
fair.
like to do it well.